Hello, I'm Corrine. We're here with Silvina Brown and Professor John Braithwaite. I guess we start with, would you please introduce yourself?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Corrine and Sil, and thank you for this opportunity to express some views about criminology and its future, and particularly in the countries from which the students involved in your project. It's a fantastic project. So I'm a professor of criminology at the Australian National University. I actually founded with my partner Valerie a school called RegNet, School of Regulation and Global Governance, and which includes a lot of criminology going on within it. So that's my background as an Australian criminologist with a lot of comparative interests.
Thank you. Well, I guess we'll start with the interview questions. If you could describe Australia in 3 words, which words would you use?
Oh, I'd say relaxed, greedy, and privileged for white people in Australia, certainly.
What are the top 3 crimes in Australia today that concern you as a criminologist, and why?
Well, I think gendered violence is really important in Australia, and we've performed poorly in getting on top of it. Corporate crime would be another, in which I've been very engaged with studying that across the decades, and I guess more recently cybercrime, which I've been much less engaged with, but I see as really important because of the connections between cybercrime and cyber terror and cyber war. So I've always been interested in the idea that crime can cascade to war and war can cascade to crime, and cybercrime and cyber warfare today is a very important mechanism for that worry.
Well, that's I haven't heard that before. Cyber war, that's really interesting. Do you have a favorite criminological theory?
I've always liked Robert K. Merton's social theory and social structure. So institutional anomy theory is important to me. The idea, a broader vision of anomy that you find in Merton and in Durkheim, that anomy meaning a disintegration of the moral order of a society, which can be caused by organized crime and drug gangs taking over large sections of a society, can be caused by war and the lead up to war, and anomy is important to that connection between war and crime. So that's, and collective efficacy theory is rolled into that. So how do you respond to anomy as a big macro structural problem that's a driver of crime? Well, you struggle against it more locally through building collective efficacy, and for me, restorative justice has been an important part of how you do that.
What made you decide to become a criminologist?
That happened by accident. Really, I was a struggling student financially, and there was a grant came into my department at the University of Queensland, and so that gave me an opportunity to work on a project on youth crime in the early 1970s. That's how I started.
Wow. That's so exciting. I started as an accident as well.
Yeah.
It wasn't my plan. I just fell in love with it.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. How did you compare to John? What was your accident in that case?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I was, my history is in law. I was going to start with law, and I joined with criminology to get in, and fell in love with it and stayed with criminology and sociology.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah, it's.
You go ahead. It's interesting how we all started this idea of study crime. For example, I started with investigating air crash investigations in South America for the board, just to know the truth, no? And then I didn't even realize that, oh, wait a minute, that is criminology. And I just was so fascinated by all the bits and pieces that you need to put together to know exactly what happened and how. And here we are. 3 different ways of studying in different ages, in different timelines. No, it's just so interesting of why we all started the career.
I think it all comes from a passion, though, doesn't it?
I do agree with that. If you do things with passion, and if you do things you like, you're going to do well with it, I think. What do you think, John?
Yes, I agree, so. And I mean, criminology is a broad church. Air traffic investigation is a really interesting topic. I mean, one of the things is that, in a way, shows the dangers of over-criminalisation, doesn't it? Because you want pilots and control tower staff who see near misses, say separation errors that don't lead to an accident, to openly report that this near miss had occurred, so that there can be a root cause of analysis of why this near accident happened. And that's a key to, as it were, to preventing future possible crimes that do kill lots of people. And, you know, it's a very interesting prism through looking at wider issues of when to criminalise and when not to criminalise.
Absolutely. You know, I used to have a trainer in the 80s that he used to say, okay, I'm gonna train you guys. I used to be a flight attendant, and then I used to train the new flight attendants. And he always used to say that he trained us like somebody who is gonna tame dragons. Probably the dragons will never appear, but you know how to tame them. And he used to say that this is the problem of preventing crime or preventing an incident. It's the disgrace is you never know how many crimes or how many incidents you really prevent.
Yeah.
It's not a number there, no?
Yeah.
So you go ahead, Corrine. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I've actually just recently read an article, I think you wrote it a little while ago, about that, pilots and openly speaking up about when they've done something wrong or something happened, and encouraging that rather than disciplining it and encouraging to hide our mistakes, and when we do something wrong, try to get people to speak up.
Yeah.
And that would work as a crime prevention in a positive reinforcement, I guess, instead of the negative.
Yeah. In the last 20, 30 years, things has changed a lot in that area. Yeah, it did, exactly for that reason too. No, just to speak up, not to hide the errors, because the next one can be taking 300 people's lives because of it.
Yeah, so the worst crime becomes cover-up of the reasons for a near miss, whether it's because one of the critical personnel had consumed alcohol or whatever it is, a system failure. These are the things we need to learn about. And that's true in your area as well, Corrine. So if you think about institutional child sexual abuse in Australia at the hands of churches, for example, to my mind, the worst behaviour was of those cardinals and church leaders who covered up, who knew that they had priests and pastors who were engaging in child sexual abuse and just moved them and reassigned them somewhere else where they left another trail of sexual abuse behind them in that second place. I mean, that was much more dangerous behavior where an archbishop is doing that for many different abusers than is the actual one-on-one behavior of one particular abuser, because there's a systemic problem of cover-up of abuse. So the criminal law has to be more attuned to the importance of prosecution of cover-up. And that might require law reform in terms of the reach of the criminal law.
I do agree with that. And I'm going to ask you something, because no long ago, I think that was 4 days ago, was a program regarding the Jehovah's Witnesses and how much they cover up, and they don't want to disclaim what exactly happened inside of the congregations. What is your view as a criminologist of that, and how do we correct it in a way? How do we penalize that as a country? Because I think that Australia is failing on doing that with them.
In churches.
Yeah, in churches. And
about context.
Exactly. And what do you do with a church who refuse to report to the authorities?
Yeah.
How do you?
It also raises the question of corporate criminal responsibility or organizational criminal responsibility. I mean, we can view churches as corporations. There's a very interesting European literature about criminalizing political parties, for example. Political parties are also very adept at covering up crimes like electoral fraud, putting out false claims through social media about opposing candidates and so on. So how do you, even miscounting of votes and corrupting electoral commissioners. So how do we think about that question about whether it should be possible to criminalize political parties? Actually, at the Nuremberg trials, the Nazi Party was convicted criminally as a party, in addition to many of its leaders individually being convicted of war crimes. And that's very interesting to contemplate. So I think in terms of these organizational problems, we have to think about lessons from the corporate crime literature as well, because organizations are very good at creating smokescreens of diffused accountability when some terrible evil has been perpetrated. I mean, so that everyone in the organization's in a position to say, it was them. So everyone's pointing at someone else at the higher levels of the organization, when in reality, what they're all doing is effectively covering up. And it's very difficult for the criminal law to penetrate that and to be able to convict anyone. When I was doing research on corporate crime in the pharmaceutical industry, I discovered 3 American companies that had vice presidents with very strange titles. And when I asked people, well, what does that mean, that strange title? They said in each of these 3 separate companies, oh, he's the vice president responsible for going to jail. In other words, lines of accountability had been defined in the organization to protect the CEO, so that if the criminality were uncovered and if someone had to be offered up, this vice president responsibility would be the one who would go to jail. And in more subtle ways, that's what goes on in organizational life all the time. But the lever of corporate criminal responsibility is useful in that. So, and deferred prosecutions, I think, are useful. So the prosecutor goes to the CEO of the corporation and says, right, you are going to be prosecuted as a corporation, But for the moment, I'm going to defer your corporate prosecution to give you a chance to offer up in a high integrity way, with assistance from outside counsel, those within your organisations who are responsible for this pattern of criminal conduct. That's one of the options.
Okay, that's very interesting. And there are some topics that you don't even think about that they get together. I mean, the part of corruption, I know it very well because I come from South America, and this kind of package of corruption and governments and drugs cartels are everywhere, and it's endemic in South America. And this is one of the main reasons why rich countries are in the position they are of poverty today. Corruption, drugs, political corruption, no?
Yeah, and it's very hard to convict people for corruption of that kind.
It is. For example, one of the cases is Bolivia. When they used to have a president for 12 years, which he was a coca grower himself. So was a bit of a problematic there, and it's fascinating how each country take the ways they take and how they do it. It's interesting.
And part of the problem in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
I mean, the Afghan government was corrupt. The Taliban was corrupt. A number of the foreign armies were corrupt. For example, paying off trucking companies who in turn would pay off the Taliban to guarantee them security while they would deliver supplies to the US Army inside Afghanistan. So everyone's corrupting everyone else. So little wonder that the people of Afghanistan become very cynical about what's happening.